The Battle of Willow Creek Farm. The morning broke over Willow Creek Farm with the usual quiet hum of rural life. Crickets fading into the dawn, the soft rustle of wind through the cornfields, and the distant mooing of cows waking up for their day. I, Ethan Harper, had just poured myself a steaming cup of coffee, the kind that burns your tongue if you're not careful, when the piece shattered like glass under a hammer. A scream ripped through the air, not mine, mind you, but one that carried the weight of pure, unfiltered panic. It belonged to Amos Grayson, my grizzled neighbor and occasional farmhand, a man whose voice could wake the dead when he wanted it to. I didn't think twice. The coffee mug hit the porch table with a clatter, spilling dark liquid across the weathered wood, and I was out the door, boots pounding the dirt before I'd even registered what might be wrong. My mind raced with possibilities. Had the barn caught fire? Had the cows somehow gotten loose again? Or, heaven forbid, had Amos finally keeled over from that bad ticker he kept complaining about? But when I rounded the corner of the house and saw him standing in the middle of my vegetable fields, hands clutching his head like he'd just witnessed the end of the world, I knew it was worse than any of that. "Ethan, boy," Amos rasped, his voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "This ain't right. This ain't right at all." I followed his gaze, and my heart sank into my boots. My fields, my pride, my joy, the very soul of Willow Creek Farm, looked like they'd been hit by a hurricane. Rows of lettuce, tomatoes, carrots, and squash, once standing tall and vibrant, were now a flattened, chaotic mess. Some plants had been ripped clean out of the soil, their fragile roots dangling helplessly in the morning sun. Others were mashed into the dirt, crushed under what looked like a stampede. Boot prints crisscrossed the earth, not just any boots, mind you, but ones with a telltale pattern I'd come to know all too well over the past few months. And there, stuck in a pile of squashed tomatoes like a flag planted on a battlefield, was the smoking gun, a single flip-flop, bright pink and studded with rhinestones. Amos let out a low whistle, shaking his head as he crouched down and plucked the flip-flop from the wreckage. He held it up like some kind of detective in one of those old crime shows, turning it over in his gnarled hands. "You know who this belongs to, don't ya?" I didn't need him to say it. The second I saw that gaudy piece of footwear, I knew exactly who'd turned my farm into a war zone. Vanessa Sinclair, my self-appointed nemesis, the woman who'd moved in 3 months ago and decided my land was her personal playground. It started small enough, her yappy little dog tearing through my fields, her spoiled teenage son, Tyler, yanking up carrots like they were free for the taking. I let it slide at first, chalking it up to city folk not knowing how things worked out here. But this was no accident. This was a full-on declaration of war. "Just yesterday," I said, my voice tight with barely contained fury, "I told her to keep off my land." She laughed at me, Amos. Laughed right in my face. He snorted, tossing the flip-flop back into the dirt. "Sounds about right. That woman's got more nerve than a bull in a china shop." I could still hear her voice from that confrontation, dripping with condescension as she twirled those oversized sunglasses like she was some kind of movie star. "Oh, come on, Ethan," she'd said, smirking. "It's just some plants. Nature belongs to everyone, you know. My yoga group loves coming here for the authentic farm vibe. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word burned in my mind as I surveyed the carnage. I'd spent years building this farm, waking before dawn, fighting off pests and drought, breaking my back to coax life from this soil. And now, because of her and her entitled little posse, half my crop was ruined, just days before the weekend farmer's market where I made most of my living. Anger surged through me, hot and sharp, but I forced myself to breathe. Losing my temper wouldn't bring my vegetables back. No, I needed to do something smarter. "Come on," I said, turning toward the hill that separated my farm from her ridiculous McMansion. "We're paying her a visit." Amos grinned, falling into step behind me like a kid tagging along for a fight. This I gotta see. Vanessa's house loomed ahead, a glaring white monstrosity with a pointless fountain out front and a sign on her manicured lawn that read "Live, Laugh, Love" in curly, pretentious script. It was the kind of place that screamed money but no sense. I marched up to the door and pounded on it, the sound echoing off the polished exterior. A moment later, it swung open, and there she stood. Vanessa Sinclair in all her over-the-top glory, wrapped in a floral robe that probably cost more than my tractor, sipping a neon green smoothie like she didn't have a care in the world. "Oh," she said, flashing a smile so fake it could have been plastic. "It's you. What's the issue now?" I held up the flip-flop, my knuckles white around it. "Care to explain why this was stuck in the middle of my destroyed vegetable field?" She barely glanced at it, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, that? Looks like I lost it. No big deal. No big deal." I stepped closer, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You and your group trampled my crops, Vanessa. You destroyed food I was supposed to sell this weekend. Do you have any idea how much money you just cost me?" She rolled her eyes, actually rolled them, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Oh, relax. It's just vegetables. They'll grow back." Amos made a choked sound beside me, probably fighting the urge to say something he'd regret. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. "That's not the point. You trespassed on my land, again, after I told you to stay off." Vanessa sighed, long and dramatic, like she was auditioning for a soap opera. "Look, I don't see why you're making such a fuss. It's not like I burned your house down. My friends just wanted to walk through your cute little farm. We needed a peaceful spot for our sunrise meditation." I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around the sheer audacity pouring out of her mouth. "So your idea of peace involves stomping through my crops like a herd of cattle?" She laughed, a sharp, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, don't be so dramatic." "Dramatic?" She wanted drama? Fine. I'd give her drama. I leaned in close, my voice low and steady. "If I catch you on my land again, Vanessa, you're going to regret it." Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she recovered with a snort. "Oh, and what are you going to do? Call the cops? Please. This town loves me." "Not for long," Amos muttered under his breath. I turned on my heel, done with her games. "Enjoy your morning, Vanessa," I called over my shoulder. "Because next time, there's going to be consequences." As we trudged back down the hill, Amos glanced at me, his eyes glinting with curiosity. "What you got in mind, son?" I didn't answer right away. My mind was spinning, gears turning as I weighed my options. The law wouldn't help much. Vanessa had friends in high places, and Sheriff Caldwell was already sick of hearing me complain about her. No, I needed something she couldn't charm her way out of. Then it hit me, clear as day. A slow grin spread across my face. "You still got those old electric fence supplies lying around?" I asked. Amos's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Boy, you thinking what I think you're thinking." "Yep." He let out a wheezy chuckle, slapping his knee. "Oh, this is going to be good." By the time the sun started dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, Amos and I were knee-deep in the dirt, surrounded by coils of wire, insulators, and a stack of warning signs I'd scrounged up from the shed. The electric fence wasn't anything fancy, just a simple setup, low voltage, enough to give a jolt, but not enough to do real harm. A friendly reminder, you might say, for anyone dumb enough to think my farm was a public park. Amos worked with a vigor I hadn't seen in him in years, grinning ear to ear as he hammered a post into the ground. "Been a long time since I set one of these up," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Last time was to keep out some raccoons that kept raiding my chicken coop. But this is a whole different kind of pest control." I smirked, tightening a wire to a post. "This one's for an invasive species named Vanessa." We both laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet fields. But beneath the humor, I knew this wasn't over. Vanessa wasn't the type to back down. She was too full of herself, too convinced the world bent to her whims. This fence was just the opening move in what I figured would be a long game. Still, as I watched the last rays of sunlight glint off the freshly strung wire, I felt a spark of satisfaction. Let her try something now. The next morning, I was up early, coffee in hand, checking the voltage with a tester I'd borrowed from Amos. The hum of electricity buzzed faintly through the air, a quiet promise of protection. I'd just finished adjusting a loose connection when I spotted her. Vanessa, strutting toward the property line like she owned the place, her oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, and her teenage son, Tyler, trailing behind her, kicking at the dirt with a bored expression. She stopped short of the first sign, which I'd painted in bold red letters. "Electric fence, do not touch." She scoffed, loud enough for me to hear from where I stood leaning against a post. Really, Ethan? An electric fence? Isn't that a little extreme? I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. Not if you respect other people's property. She waved a hand like she was shooing away a fly. This is ridiculous. You're acting like I came in here with a bulldozer. She gestured toward the ruined section of my field, still a sore sight, despite my efforts to salvage what I could. Might as well have, I shot back. She let out one of those exaggerated sighs she was so good at then, to my absolute disbelief, reached out and touched the fence. The zap wasn't loud, just a quick crackle, but the effect was instant. Vanessa shrieked, a high-pitched wail that could have woken half the county, her body jerking back like she'd been slapped. Her arms flailed wildly, and in a moment of perfect cosmic justice, she tripped over her own feet and landed with a wet splat in a pile of manure I'd been meaning to spread across the field. For a second, everything froze. Then Amos, who'd been watching from his porch across the way, let out a cackle so loud it echoed off the barn. Vanessa scrambled to her feet, her pristine yoga pants now smeared with brown, her face a mix of shock and fury. Tyler, instead of helping, just stared at her, wide-eyed, before bursting into laughter. "Mom, that was hilarious." Vanessa whirled on me, flinging manure off her arms as she shrieked. "You did this on purpose." I bit back a grin, crossing my arms. "I put up a fence to protect my land. You ignored the sign. That's on you." She clenched her fists, breathing hard, her face turning a shade of red that rivaled my ruined tomatoes. "I'm calling the police. This is assault." Amos, still chuckling, called out from his porch. "Ain't no assault if it's self-inflicted, lady. That's just good ol' karma." Vanessa stomped off toward her car, leaving a trail of muck behind her. She yanked the door open, glared at me one last time, and roared, "This isn't over," before speeding off in a cloud of dust. I shook my head, watching her go. She's really gonna try calling the cops, isn't she? Amos wiped his eyes, still wheezing with laughter. "Oh, I hope so. I could use some more entertainment." Sure enough, an hour later, Sheriff Tom Caldwell's cruiser rolled up my driveway. He stepped out, adjusting his belt, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Tom was a no-nonsense guy, the kind who'd seen it all in this small town, and I could tell he already knew this was a waste of his time. "All right," he said, taking off his sunglasses. "Let's hear it." Vanessa launched into her story the second he turned to her, flailing her arms like she was auditioning for a drama award. He set up a dangerous electric fence, and I was electrocuted. He did it on purpose to hurt me. Tom glanced at me, one eyebrow raised. "That true?" I gestured to the fence, the signs posted every few feet clear as day. "I put up a fence to keep trespassers out." She touched it on her own. Tom rubbed his chin, inspecting the setup. "Fence legal. Low voltage, within regulations," I said with a nod. He turned back to Vanessa, who was still fuming. "Sounds like you shocked yourself, ma'am." Her jaw dropped, like she couldn't believe he wasn't hauling me off in cuffs. But he humiliated me." Tom sighed, clearly done with her theatrics. "I told you before to stay off this land, Vanessa. Ethan's got every right to protect his property. You step over that fence again, you'll be the one getting fined for trespassing." Vanessa let out a scream of pure frustration, stomped back to her car, and slammed the door so hard I thought the glass might crack. She peeled out, leaving nothing but the faint stench of manure and entitlement in her wake. Tom turned to me, shaking his head. "She'll be back, you know." "I know," I said, meeting his gaze. He chuckled, tipping his hat. "Just be ready." And with that, he drove off. Amos clapped me on the back as we watched the dust settle. "Boy, that was satisfying. But you ain't seen the last of her." I sighed, nodding. Figured as much. Vanessa wasn't just stubborn. She was the type who couldn't stand losing. I'd embarrassed her, sure, but more than that, I'd shown her she couldn't walk all over me. For someone like her, that was a wound that wouldn't heal easy. I didn't know what she'd try next, but I knew one thing for sure. I'd be ready. The next few days passed in an uneasy quiet. I threw myself into repairing what I could of the fields, replanting where possible, salvaging what wasn't too far gone, and hauling away the ruined crops. It was backbreaking work, but it kept my mind off Vanessa. For a fleeting moment, I dared to hope she'd learned her lesson and moved on. But deep down, I knew better. People like her didn't slink away, they doubled down. That suspicion proved true on a still evening just before sundown. I was out on the porch, nursing a beer and watching the shadows stretch across the fields, when I saw them. A small group of women creeping along the edge of my property like they thought they were in some spy movie. They were decked out in matching yoga pants and expensive workout gear, rubber gloves on their hands and rain boots on their feet. Leading the charge was Vanessa, bolt cutters glinting in her grip, her face set with the kind of determination that spelled trouble. Amos, perched in his usual spot with a glass of lemonade, nudged me with his elbow. "Looks like you got yourself a little invasion party." I sighed, setting my beer down. Figured she wouldn't give up that easy. He grinned, leaning forward for a better view. "Reckon you got a plan for this?" "Oh, yeah," I said, a slow smile tugging at my lips. "I've been waiting for this." Vanessa and her yoga squad reached the fence, pausing just shy of the warning signs. They huddled together, whispering like they were plotting a heist. I could catch snippets of their conversation from the porch. "This is insane," one of them muttered, a nervous edge to her voice. "What if we get caught?" Vanessa scoffed, tossing her hair. "He can't do anything. It's just a stupid fence. We have a right to walk wherever we want." Another woman pointed at the signs, hesitating. "But it says electric." Vanessa waved her off. "It's probably fake. Just another scare tactic. He can't legally electrocute people." I raised an eyebrow, leaning back against the porch railing. She really didn't learn, did she? They pulled out the bolt cutters and made their move. The second the metal jaws touched the wire, a loud zap split the air, followed by a chorus of shrieks. The woman holding the cutters jerked back, flailing like she'd been stung, and crashed into one of her friends, who then stumbled into Vanessa. The whole group toppled backward into the mud like a row of dominoes, arms and legs tangling in a mess of yoga pants and outrage. Amos howled with laughter, slapping his knee so hard I thought he'd bruise it. I couldn't hold back a chuckle myself, watching as Vanessa scrambled to her feet, mud dripping from her designer outfit, her face twisted with rage. "That's it," she screeched, snatching the bolt cutters from her fallen friend. "Destroy the fence." Two of her posse hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances, but Vanessa wasn't having it. She lunged at the fence, ignoring the signs, and managed to snap one wire before another jolt sent her sprawling back into the mud with a fresh scream. This time, I didn't even try to hide my laughter. It rolled out of me, loud and unapologetic. "Vanessa," I called, stepping off the porch. "You really don't learn, do you?" She whipped her head toward me, her face red with fury. "You think this is funny?" "Oh, absolutely," I said, nodding. She stomped toward me, mud flinging with every step, her voice rising to a near hysterical pitch. "I will sue you for this. I will take everything you own." I held up my hands, calm as could be. "For what?" "Putting up a legal fence on my property with clear warning signs." Her eye twitched, her control slipping, and her friends, once so eager to follow her, started shifting uncomfortably, clearly regretting their life choices. Then came the cherry on top. A sudden whoosh filled the air as the motion-activated sprinklers I'd installed a week ago kicked on, dousing the entire group in a blast of ice-cold water. Screams erupted again, high-pitched and panicked, as they flailed, trying to escape the deluge. Vanessa let out a gurgling shriek, her expensive hair extensions sagging under the weight of the water, while her squad scattered like startled chickens. Amos nearly fell out of his chair, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "Boy, this is better than television." Vanessa staggered toward her car, slipping in the mud, her friends abandoning her as they fled in every direction. She climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and peeled out, tires kicking up a spray of dirt and water. For a moment, silence settled over the farm, broken only by Amos's wheezing chuckles. "That woman's got the persistence of a hungry raccoon," he said, wiping his eyes. "But I think you broke her spirit this time." I wasn't so sure. Vanessa wasn't just entitled, she was obsessed. I'd humiliated her in front of her posse, shown her she couldn't win, and for someone like her, that was a blow to the core. She'd be back. The only question was how far she'd go. The next morning, I was still riding the high of watching Vanessa's yoga invasion fall apart when Sheriff Caldwell's cruiser rolled up again. He stepped out, a grin tugging at his lips, looking more amused than I'd seen him in a while. "Well," he said, leaning against the hood. "Guess who filed another complaint?" I sighed, crossing my arms. "Let me guess. Starts with V, ends with a bad attitude?" He chuckled. "Bingo. She's claiming you assaulted her." I gestured to the fence, the signs, and the muddy mess left from her stunt. "She didn't mention the part where she trespassed, did she?" "Nope," Tom said, shaking his head. "Left that detail out." "So what's going to happen?" I asked. "Not a damn thing," he replied. "Fence is legal, trespassing's illegal, and after what I saw on Amos's security footage," he paused, throwing air quotes around the words, "she's lucky she's not getting arrested." I turned to Amos, who was suddenly very focused on his lemonade. "You recorded it?" He took a slow sip, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Might have accidentally left my phone on the porch railing last night. Caught the whole thing. Sheriff here thought it was mighty entertaining." Tom grinned. "Oh, it was. And guess what? The video's already making the rounds online. People are calling her the farmyard fool." I let out a long breath, relief washing over me. "So what now?" "Word is she's packing up," Tom said, adjusting his hat. "Selling the house. Can't show her face around here anymore without people snickering." For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. A few days later, sure enough, a moving truck pulled up to Vanessa's house. I stood on my porch with Amos, watching as she barked orders at the movers, her sunglasses hiding what I could only imagine was a face full of rage. As she climbed into her car, she glanced my way one last time. Our eyes met. I gave her a small wave. She flipped me off and sped away, tires squealing. Amos chuckled. "Well, that's one way to clear out the neighborhood." I took a deep breath, looking out over my land, my farm, my home, finally free of Vanessa's nonsense. "Think I should put up a new sign?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "What kind?" I grinned. "One that says Vanessa Free Zone." He slapped his knee, laughing. "Now that's a sign I'd pay to see." With Vanessa gone, Willow Creek Farm settled back into its old rhythm. I replanted the fields, tended the crops, and got back to the life I loved, without the constant threat of unwanted visitors treating my land like their personal playground. The story of Vanessa's downfall spread through town like wildfire, thanks to Amos's video, and folks couldn't stop talking about it. I'd get knowing nods at the farmer's market, chuckles from the cashier at the feed store, even a good riddance from Tom when I ran into him at the diner. But I didn't let it go to my head. I'd won, sure, but I knew there'd always be another Vanessa out there, someone who thought rules didn't apply to them. So I kept the fence up, the signs posted, and the sprinklers ready, just in case. If another entitled neighbor ever decided to test me, well, I'd be ready. As for Amos, he took to calling himself my security consultant, claiming he'd earned the title after his accidental footage saved the day. I didn't argue. Truth was, I owed him one. We'd sit on the porch most evenings, him with his lemonade and me with my beer, watching the sun set over the fields and swapping stories about the good old days. One night, as the crickets started their chorus, he turned to me, a thoughtful look in his eye. "You think she'll ever come back?" I shook my head. "Not if she's got any sense left." He chuckled. "That's assuming she had any to begin with." I laughed, raising my bottle in a toast. "To peace and quiet." He clinked his glass against it. "And to the best damn pest control in Willow Creek." And with that, we settled into the stillness, the farm stretching out before us, ours again, at last.